Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of History and Truth. Today, we're doing part 3 of the detailed description of the Burma campaign, dealing with 1944 to 1945. Here's an image of two British soldiers patrolling the ruins of Bahe in Federated Shan States, central Burma, in January 1945. The Burma campaign in the Southeast Asian theater of World War II was fought primarily by British Commonwealth, Chinese, and United States forces against the forces of Imperial Japan, who were assisted by the Burmese National Army, the Indian National Army, and to some degree by Thailand. The British Commonwealth land forces were drawn primarily from the United Kingdom, British India, and Africa. Partly because monsoon rains made effective campaigning possible only for about half of the year, the Burma campaign was almost the longest campaign of the war. During the campaigning season of 1942, the Japanese had conquered Burma, driving British, Indian, and Chinese forces from the country and forcing the British administration to flee into India. After scoring some defensive successes during 1943, they then attempted to forestall Allied offensives in 1944 by launching an invasion of India, Operation U-Go, and this failed with disastrous losses. During the next campaigning season, beginning in December 1944, the Allies launched several offensives into Burma. American and Chinese forces advancing from northernmost Burma linked up with armies of the Chinese Republic advancing into Yunnan, which allowed the Allies to complete the Burma Road in the last months of the war. In the coastal province of Arakan, Allied amphibious landings secured vital offshore islands and inflicted heavy casualties, although the Japanese maintained some positions until the end of the campaign. In central Burma, however, the Allies crossed the Irrawaddy River and defeated the main Japanese armies in the theater. Allied formations then followed up with an advance on Rangoon, the capital and principal port. Japanese rearguards delayed them until the monsoon struck, but an Allied airborne and amphibious attack secured the city, which the Japanese had abandoned. In a final operation just before the end of the war, Japanese forces which had been isolated in southern Burma attempted to escape across the Satang River, suffering heavy casualties. Background: Allied plans. As the monsoon rains ended late in 1944, the Allies were preparing to launch large-scale offensives into Japanese-occupied Burma. The main Allied headquarters for the British, Indians, and Americans in the theater of war was Southeast Asia Command, based at Kandy in Ceylon, and commanded by Admiral Louis Mountbatten. The command had considered 3 major plans as far back as July 1944. Plan X. The main effort was to be made by the American-led Northern Combat Area Command, with support from the British 14th Army. Starting from Mogwon and Myitkyina, which had been captured in mid-1944, the NCAC would link up with the Chinese Expeditionary Force of the National Revolutionary Army, attacking from Yunnan Province under General Wei Li-huan about Lashio. The aim was to complete the Ledo Road, which would link Assam in northeast India with Yunnan, supplementing the Hump airlift, which delivered aid and war material to China. Plan Y. The major effort was to be made by 14th Army across the Chinwon River into central Burma, with the aim of capturing Mandalay and linking up with the NCAC and Yunnan Chinese around Maimo, about 20 miles or 32 kilometers east of Mandalay. Plan Z, or Z. Under this plan, which would later be developed into Operation Dracula, the main effort would be an amphibious and airborne attack on Rangoon, the capital and principal port of Burma. If successful, this would isolate the Japanese in Burma from their lines of communication and force them to evacuate the country. When these plans were studied, it was found that the resources required for Plan Z or Z, landing craft, aircraft carrier groups, etc., would probably not be made available until the war in Europe was won. Mountbatten, nevertheless, proposed to attempt Plans Y and Z simultaneously, but Plan Y was adopted and renamed Operation Capital. Under this, 14th Army, supported by 221 Group RAF, would make the major offensive into central Burma, where the terrain and road network favored the British and Indian armored and motorized formations. The NCAC and Yunnan Chinese, supported by the United States 10th and 14th Air Forces, would make subsidiary advances to Lashio, while the 15th Corps, supported by 224 Group RAF, would seize the coastal province of Arakan, securing or constructing airfields which could be used to supply 14th Army. Japanese plans. In the aftermath of these defeats the previous year, the Japanese had made major changes in their command. The most important was the appointment of Lieutenant General Hyotaro Kimura to command the Burma Area Army, succeeding General Masakazu Kawabe. Kimura was primarily a logistician who had previously been Vice Minister of War, and it was hoped that he could use the natural and industrial resources of Burma to make his army self-sufficient. Nevertheless, the Southern Expeditionary Army Group, which had overall control of all Japanese land forces in southern Asia and much of the Pacific Ocean, and was commanded by Field Marshal Hisashi Terauchi, found 60,000 reinforcements for Kimura's army, with equipment for 3 infantry divisions and 500 lorries and 2,000 pack animals for the lines of communication. Allied air attacks strangled the Japanese communications via the Burma Railway and the port of Rangoon, and only 30,000 of the intended reinforcements reached Burma. Under pressure of events in the Pacific, Terauchi even withdrew some units from Burma during the campaign. Although the Allies expected that the Japanese would fight as far forward as possible on the Chinwin, Kimura recognized that most of the Japanese units in Burma were weakened by heavy casualties during the previous year and were short of equipment. To avoid fighting at a disadvantage on the Chinwin or in the Shuebo Plain between the Chinwin and the Irrawaddy River, where the terrain provided comparatively few obstacles. Here is the Irrawaddy River. Here is the Chinwin River. The Irrawaddy. The Chinwin. Okay, the withdrawing of the 15th Army behind the Irrawaddy, where they would defend against the British 14th Army, operation, which we called Operation Ban, or Ban. The 28th Army was to continue to defend the Arakan and lower Irrawaddy Valley, down here, which would be Operation Khan, while 33rd Army would attempt to prevent the completion of the new road link between India and China by defending the cities of Bhamo and Lashio, and mounting guerrilla raids, which was Operation Dan. Burma. Another factor was to become significant during the campaign was the changing attitude of the Burmese population. During the Japanese invasion of Burma in 1942, many of the majority of Bamar population had actively aided the Japanese army, although the Japanese had established a nominally independent Burmese government, the state of Burma, under Bam Mao, and formed the Burma National Army under Aung San, they remained in effective control of the country. Their strict control, along with wartime privations, turned the Burmese against them. Aung San had sought an alliance with Thaksin Soe, who was leading a communist insurgency in southern Arakan as early as 1943. They formed the Anti-Fascist Organization and intended turning against the Japanese at some stage, but Thaksin Soe dissuaded Aung San from openly rebelling until Allied forces had established permanent footholds in Burma. In early 1945, Aung San sought the aid of the Allied liaison organization Force 136, which was already aiding resistance movements among the minority Karen population. Although there was some debate among the Allies, Mountbatten eventually decided that Aung San should be supported. Force 136 was now to abet the defection of the entire Burma National Army to the Allies. The Indian National Army. Another force nominally under Japanese control was the Indian National Army, a force mainly composed of former prisoners of war and volunteers from the Indian expatriate communities in British Malaya and Burma. Its commander-in-chief was Subhas Chandra Bose. During the 1945 campaign, some INA units fought stoutly against the Allies, but others deserted or capitulated readily. The Japanese had alienated many of the INA by giving them low priority for equipment and supplies, or by using them as laborers and carriers rather than as fighting troops. Their morale was also affected in some units by the obvious turn of fortune against the Japanese. The campaign. Here's an image of Royal Marines landing on Ramree Island. The Southern Front. The Japanese 28th Army, commanded by Lieutenant General Shozo Sakurai, defended the coastal Arakan region and the lower Irrawaddy Valley. The 54th Division defended the Mayu Peninsula and the Caledon River Valley. The 55th Division garrisoned several ports and part of southern Burma, with a regiment on Mount Polpa in central Burma. And the 72nd Independent Mixed Brigade was stationed around the oil fields at Yanangjuang on the Irrawaddy. The Allied forces in Arakan were controlled by the 15th Indian Corps under Lieutenant General Philip Christensen. The Corps' first major objective was Akyab Island, at the end of the Mayu Peninsula. Here. The island held a port and an important airfield, which the Allies planned to use as a base from which to deliver supplies by air to the troops in central Burma. An attempt to capture the island in 1943 had been defeated. A second attempt in early 1944 gained some ground but was abandoned because of monsoon rains and lack of resources. As the monsoon ended in late 1944, 15th Corps resumed the advance on Akyab for the third year in succession. The 25th Indian Division advanced on Foul Point and Rakduang at the end of the Mayu Peninsula, being supplied by landing craft over beaches to avoid the risk of Japanese attacks against their lines of communication. The 82nd West Africa Division cleared the valley of the Kalapanzin River before crossing a mountain range into the Caledon River Valley, while the 81st West Africa Division advanced down the Caledon River repeating the move it had made in early 1944. The two African divisions converged on Myo Hong near the mouth of the Caledon River, cutting the supply lines of the Japanese troops in the Mayu Peninsula. The island held a port and an important airfield, which the Allies planned to use as a base from which to deliver supplies by air to the troops in central Burma. An attempt to capture the island in 1943 had been defeated. A second attempt in early 1944 gained some ground, but was abandoned because of monsoon rains and lack of resources. As the monsoon ended in late 1944, 15 Corps resumed the advance on Akyab for the third year in succession. The 25th Indian Division advanced on Foul Point and Rathdong at the end of the Mayu Peninsula, being supplied by landing craft over beaches to avoid the risk of Japanese attacks against their lines of communication. The 82nd West Africa Division cleared the valley of the Kalapanzin River before crossing a mountain range into the Caledon River Valley, while the 81st West Africa Division advanced down the Caledon River, repeating the move it had made in early 1944. The two African divisions converged on Myo Hong near the mouth of the Caledon River, cutting the supply lines of the Japanese troops in the Mayu Peninsula. The Japanese evacuated Akyab Island on 31st December 1944. It was occupied by 15 Corps without resistance 2 days later. The 82nd Division next attacked south along the coastal plain, while the 25th Indian Division, with 3 Commando Brigade under command, made amphibious landings further south to catch the Japanese in a pincer movement. First ashore was 42 Commando on the southeastern face of the Myeryong Peninsula on 12th January 1945. That's them. Over the next few days, the commandos and a brigade of 25th Division cleared the peninsula and denied the Japanese the use of many waterways along the Arakan coast. They kind of cleared out this whole area. On 22nd January, 3 Commando Brigade landed on the beaches at Dangbon Trong, led this time by No. 1 Commando. Having secured the beaches, they moved inland and became involved in very heavy fighting with the Japanese. The following night, a brigade of the 25th Division was landed in support. The fighting around the beachhead involved hand-to-hand fighting as the Japanese realized the danger of encirclement and threw all their available troops into the fight. The commandos and Indian troops managed to turn the tide of the battle and take the village of Kangao only on 29th January. Meanwhile, the forces on the Myeryong Peninsula linked up with the 82nd Division, fighting its way overland towards Kangao. Caught between the 82nd Division and the forces already in Kangao, the Japanese were forced to scatter, leaving behind thousands of dead and most of their heavy equipment. Here is an image of the Royal Indian Naval personnel on board a landing craft during combined operations off Myeryong in January 1945. With the coastal area secured, the Allies were free to build air bases which could be supplied by sea on the 2 offshore islands here, Ramri Island and Chiduba Island. Chiduba, the smaller of the 2 islands, had no Japanese garrison, but the Battle of Ramri Island lasted for 6 weeks. After the initial landings on 21st January by the 26th Indian Division, before the survivors of the small but tenacious Japanese garrison withdrew from the island. Here we have an image of British troops in landing craft making their way ashore on Ramree Island, 21st January 1945. Suffering heavy casualties to disease, starvation, Allied motor launches and other lifts, and mainly, allegedly, crocodiles. This was allegedly the largest crocodile attack on humans in history. Here's another image of Japanese soldiers being eaten by crocodiles. So this is the big main thing about the history of Ramree Island, the great crocodile attack. Following these actions, 15 Corps operations were curtailed to release transport aircraft to support 14th Army. The 81st Division and the 50th Indian Tank Brigade were withdrawn to India, and outflanking moves by the 82nd Division and 26th Indian Division through the hills around An and Tangop were abandoned or cancelled, and the Corps' divisions were withdrawn to the coast. The Japanese successfully defended the port of Tangop and the An and Tangop passes across the Arakan Hills until very late in the campaign. Northern Front. This is the Northern Combat Area Command's operations. The Japanese 33rd Army, led by Lieutenant General Masaki Honda, defended northern Burma against attacks from both northern India and the Chinese province of Yunnan. The 18th Division faced the American and Chinese Northern Combat Area Command, NCAC, under Lieutenant General Daniel Isom Sultan, advancing south from Myitkyina and Mogwang. From here, advancing south from Myitkyina and Mogwang, here and here, advancing south, which the Allies had secured in 1944, while the 56th Division faced the large Chinese Yunnan armies led by Wei Lihuang. Although 33rd Army had been forced to relinquish most of the reinforcements it had received the previous year, the operations of the NCAC were limited from late 1944 onwards, as many of its troops were withdrawn by air to face Japanese attacks in China. In Operation Grubworm, the Chinese 14th and 22nd Divisions were flown via Myitkyina to defend the airfields around Kunming, vital to the airlift of aid to China, nicknamed the Hump. Nevertheless, the command resumed its advance. On the right flank of the command, the British 36th Division, which had been assigned to the command in July 1944 to replace the Chindits, advanced south down the railway valley from Mogwang to Indao. It made contact with the 19th Indian Division near Indao on 10th December 1944, and 14th Army and NCAC now had a continuous front. On Sultan's left, the Chinese new 1st Army, commanded by Sun Li Zhen and consisting of the 30th Division and 38th Division, advanced from Myitkyina to Bammo. Bammo's down here. The Japanese resisted for several weeks, but Bammo fell on 15th December. The Chinese new 6th Army, commanded by Liao Yaocheng and consisting of the 50th Division, infiltrated through the difficult terrain between these two wings to threaten the Japanese lines of communication. The American 500 5,334th Composite Unit, known as the Mars Brigade, had replaced Merrill's Marauders. The unit was commanded by Brigadier General J.P. Willey and consisted of the 475th United States Infantry Regiment, the 124th United States Cavalry Regiment, and the elite Chinese 1st Regiment. They attempted to cut the Burma Road behind the Japanese 56th Division. They failed to isolate the Japanese division, but hastened its retreat. Sun Li Jin's new First Army made contact with Wei Luohang's armies, advancing from Yunnan near Hispao on 21st January 1945, and the Ledo Road could finally be completed. The first truck convoy from India arrived in Kunming on 4th February, but by this point in the war, the value of the Ledo Road was uncertain, as it would now affect the military situation in China, the Ledo Road. To the annoyance of the British and Americans, Chinese leader Chiang Kai-shek ordered Sultan to halt his advance at Lashio, here, which was captured on 7th March. The British and Americans generally refused to understand that Chiang had to balance the needs of China as a whole against fighting the Japanese in a British colony. The Japanese had already withdrawn the 18th Division from the Northern Front to face the 14th Army in central Burma. On 12th March, the 33rd Army headquarters was also dispatched there, leaving only the 56th Division to hold the Northern Front. This division was also withdrawn in late March and early April. From 1st April, NCAC's operations stopped and its units returned to China. The British 36th Division moved to Mandalay, which had been captured in March and was subsequently withdrawn to India. A U.S.-led guerrilla force, OSS Detachment 101, took over the military responsibilities of the NCAC, while British Civil Affairs and other units such as the Civil Affairs Service, Burma, stepped in to take over its other responsibilities. Northern Burma was partitioned into line of communication areas by the military authorities. Central Front. The Japanese 15th Army, commanded by Lieutenant General Shihachi Katamura, held the central part of the front. The army was falling back behind the Irrawaddy, here, deploying rear guards to delay the Allied advance. A bridgehead was retained in the Saguang Hills. The 15th Army consisted of the 15th Division, 31st Division, and the 33rd Division. The 53rd Division provided a reserve although it was controlled directly by the Burma Area Army. During the campaign, the headquarters of the Japanese 33rd Army and parts of the 2nd Division, 18th Division, and 49th Divisions reinforced the forces on the central part of the front. The British 14th Army under Lieutenant General William Slim made the main Allied thrust, codenamed Operation Capital, into central Burma. It consisted of 4 corps under Lieutenant General Frank Messervy and 33rd Corps under Lieutenant General Montague Stopford, together controlling 6 infantry divisions, 2 armored brigades, and 3 independent infantry brigades. The main constraint on the number of forces the 14th Army could deploy was supply. A carefully designed system involving large amounts of air transport was introduced, and major construction projects were undertaken to improve the land route from India into Burma and make use of river transport. Units of both corps of the 14th Army crossed the Chinwin and attacked into the Shwebo Plain, 4th Corps on the left and 33rd Corps on the right. After a few days, when it was realized that the Japanese had fallen back behind the Irrawaddy River, the plan was hastily changed. Now only 33rd Corps was to continue the attack into the Shuibo Plain, reinforced by the 1 division of 4 Corps, which had been committed across the Chinwin, while the main body of 4th Corps was switched to the right flank, changing its axis of advance to the Gangao Valley west of the Chinwin. It aimed to cross the Irrawaddy close to Paco, and then capture the main Japanese line of communication center at Miktila. Diversionary measures such as dummy radio traffic were made to persuade the Japanese that both corps were still aimed at Mandalay. The new plan was a success. Allied air superiority and the thin Japanese presence on the ground meant that the Japanese were unaware of the strength of the force moving on Pakoku. Here are troops of the 20th Indian Division crossing the Irrawaddy 1 mile west of Myanmar on 14th February 1945. During January and February, the 33rd Corps, consisting of the British 2nd Division, 19th Indian Division, 20th Indian Division, 268th Indian Brigade, and the 254th Indian Tank Brigade, cleared the Shuibo Plain and established bridgeheads over the Irrawaddy River near Mandalay. There was heavy fighting, which attracted Japanese reserves and fixed their attention. Late in February, the 7th Indian Division, leading 4 Corps, seized crossings at Nyangu and Pagan near Pakoku, while the 28th East Africa Infantry Brigade maintained diversionary pressure against Yanguang on the west bank of the river. The 17th Indian Division and the 255th Indian Armored Brigade crossed through 7th Indian Division's bridgeheads and began advancing to Miktila. In the dry season, central Burma is largely an open plain. See all this area here? It's an open plain here. Burma, an open plain. With sandy soil, and there is also a good road network. The mechanized 17th Indian Division and the Armored Brigade could move rapidly and unhindered in this open terrain, apparently taking the staffs of the various Japanese headquarters by surprise with this blitzkrieg maneuver. Reinforced by the 3rd Brigade of the 17th Indian Division, which flew in to a captured airstrip, they struck Miktila on 1st March and captured it in 4 days, despite resistance to the last man. In an oft-recounted incident, some Japanese soldiers crouched in trenches with aircraft bombs, with orders to detonate them when an enemy tank loomed over the trench. Japanese reinforcements arrived too late to relieve the garrison, but they besieged the town in an attempt to recapture it and destroy the 17th Indian Division. Although 8 Japanese regiments were eventually involved, they were mostly weak in numbers and drawn from 5 divisions, so the efforts were not coordinated. The Japanese 33rd Army HQ, retitled the Army of the Decisive Battle, was assigned to take command in this vital sector, but was unable to establish proper control. The 17th Indian Division had been reinforced by a brigade of the 5th Indian Division, landed by air. British tank infantry forces sallied out of Miktila to break up Japanese concentrations, and by the end of the month, the Japanese had suffered heavy casualties and had lost most of their artillery, which was their chief anti-tank weapon. The Japanese broke off the attack and retreated to Piaobue. Here is an image of a Stuart light tank of an Indian cavalry regiment during the advance on Rangoon. The 17th Indian Division and 255th Armored Brigade began the Four Corps advance on 6 April by striking from all sides of the delaying position held by the remnants of the Japanese 33rd Army at Piaobue, while a flanking column, nicknamed Claude Col, of tanks and mechanized infantry cut the main road behind them and attacked their rear. This column was initially delayed by the remnants of the Japanese 49th Division defending a village, but bypassed them to defeat the remnants of the Japanese 53rd Division and destroy the last tanks remaining to the Japanese 14th Tank Regiment. As they then turned north against the town of Piaobue itself, they attacked Lieutenant General Honda's headquarters, but were not aware of the presence of an army headquarters and broke off to capture the town instead. From this point, the advance down the main road to Rangoon faced little organized opposition. At Pienmana, the town and the bridge were seized on 19th April before the Japanese could organize their defense. The Japanese 33rd Army headquarters was present in Pienmana. From reports by agents, the Allies were aware this time of Honda's presence, and his headquarters was attacked by tanks and aircraft. Lieutenant General Honda and his staff escaped at night on foot, but they now had little means of controlling the remnants of their formations. Here's an image of British 3-inch mortar detachments supporting the 19th Indian Division advance along the Mao Chi Road, east of Tongho. This is in 1944. Some units of the Japanese 15th Army had reorganized in the Shan states and were reinforced by the Japanese 56th Division, which had been transferred from the Northern Front. They were ordered to move to Tonggu to block the road to Rangoon, but a general uprising by Karen guerrillas, who had organized and equipped by Force 136, delayed them long enough for the 5th Indian Division to reach the town first on 23rd April. The Japanese briefly recaptured Tonggu once the 5th Indian Division had passed through, but the 19th Indian Division, which was following up the leading units of 4 Corps, captured the town again and slowly drove the Japanese back towards Mauchi to the east. The 17th Indian Division resumed the lead of the advance and met a Japanese blocking force north of Pegu, 40 miles, 64 kilometers north of Rangoon. Here. On 25th April. The various line of communication troops, naval personnel, and even Japanese civilians in Rangoon had been formed into the Japanese 105th Independent Mixed Brigade. This scratch formation used anti-tank mines improvised from aircraft bombs, anti-aircraft guns, and suicide attacks with pole charges to delay the 17th Indian Division, and then defended Pegu until 30th April, when it withdrew into the hills west of Pegu. The monsoon broke as the division resumed its advance on Rangoon, and floods slowed the division. While the capture and siege of Miktila took place, the 7th Indian Division, reinforced by a mechanized brigade of the 5th Indian Division, secured the Irrawaddy bridgehead, captured the important river port at Mingyuan, and began clearing the lines of communication to Miktila. Mandalay. Mandalay. Here are troops of the 19th Indian Division in Mandalay. You can see the pagoda in the background. While the Japanese were distracted by events at Miktila, 33rd Corps had renewed its attack on Mandalay. It fell to the 19th Indian Division on 20th March, though the Japanese held the former citadel, which the British called Fort Dufferin, for another week. Many of the historically and culturally significant areas of Mandalay, including the old royal palace were burned to the ground. A great deal was lost by the Japanese choice to make a last stand in the city itself. The other divisions of 33rd Corps simultaneously attacked from their bridgeheads across the Irrawaddy. The Japanese 15th Army was reduced to a small detachments and parties of stragglers, making their way south, or east, into the Shan states. With the fall of Mandalay and of Maingmo to its east, the Japanese communications to the front in the north of Burma were cut, and the Allied road link between India and China was therefore finally secured, though far too late to affect the course of the war in China. The fall of Mandalay also precipitated the change of sides by the Burma National Army and open rebellion against the Japanese by other underground movements belonging to the anti-fascist organization, that's Aung San. In the last week of March, Aung San, Commander-in-Chief of the Burma National Army, appeared in public in Burmese native dress instead of Japanese uniform. Shortly afterwards, most of the Burma National Army paraded in Rangoon and then marched out of the city as if going to the front in central Burma. They then rebelled against the Japanese on 27th March. The race for Rangoon. Though the Allied force had advanced successfully into central Burma, it was vital to capture the port of Rangoon before the monsoon rains began. The temporarily upgraded overland routes from India would disintegrate under heavy rain, which would also curtail flying and reduce the amount of supplies which could be delivered by air. Furthermore, Southeast Asia Command had been notified that many of the American transport aircraft allocated to the theater would be withdrawn in June at the latest. The use of Rangoon would be necessary to meet the needs of the large army force and, as importantly, the food needs of the civilian population in the areas liberated. The British 2nd Division and the British 36th Division, both of which were understrength and could not readily be reinforced, were withdrawn to India to reduce the demand for supplies. The 36th Division also exchanged the Indian battalions in one of its brigades for the depleted British battalions in the 20th Indian Division. The Indian 33rd Corps, consisting of the 7th Indian Division and the 20th Indian Division, mounted the 14th Army's secondary drive down the Irrawaddy River Valley against the Japanese 28th Army. The 4th Corps of the 5th, 17th, and 19th Indian Divisions made the main attack down the Sitang River Valley. Operation Dracula. Here are landing craft carrying troops up the Rangoon River. In the original conception of the plan to retake Burma, it had been intended that the 15th Indian Corps would make an amphibious assault, codenamed Operation Dracula, on Rangoon, long before the 14th Army reached the capital. In order to ease supply problems, the lack of resources meant that Dracula was postponed and the operation was subsequently dropped in favor of a planned assault on Phuket Island off the Kra Isthmus. Here are Indian paratroopers landing over Rangoon, Burma in 1945. Slim feared that the Japanese would defend Rangoon to the last man through the monsoon, which would put the 14th Army in a disastrous supply situation. In late March, he therefore asked for Dracula to be reinstated at short notice. However, Kimura had ordered Rangoon to be evacuated, starting in 22nd April. Many troops were evacuated by sea, although British destroyers claimed several ships. Kimura's own HQ and the establishments of Bao Mao and the Subas Bosch left by land, covered by the action of 105 Mixed Brigade at Pegu, and proceeded to Mole Mine. On 1st May, a Gurkha parachute battalion was dropped on Elephant Point and cleared Japanese coastal defense batteries at the mouth of the Rangoon River. Here are Gurkha paratroopers checking their equipment before being dropped on a series of strategic points around Rangoon. The 26th Indian Division started to land the next day as the monsoon began and took over Rangoon, which had seen an orgy of looting and lawlessness since the Japanese had left. The leading troops of the 17th and 26th Indian Divisions met at Legu, 28 miles or 45 kilometers north of Rangoon on 6th May. Final operations. Following the capture of Rangoon, a new 12th Army headquarters, commanded by Lieutenant General Stopford, was created from the 33rd Corps HQ to take control of the Allied formations which were to remain in Burma, including 4th Corps. Here are men of the 15th Indian Corps landing near Elephant Point at the beginning of Operation Dracula on 2nd May 1945. The remnants of the Japanese Burma Area Army remained in control of Tenasserim Province. The Japanese 28th Army, which had withdrawn from Arakan and unsuccessfully resisted 33rd Corps in the Irrawaddy Valley, and the 105 Independent Brigade were cut off in the Pegu Yomas, a range of low jungle-covered hills between the Irrawaddy and Sitang rivers. They planned to break out and rejoin Burma Area Army. To cover this breakout, Kimura ordered Honda's 33rd Army to mount a diversionary offensive across the Sitang, although the entire army could muster the strength of barely a regiment. On 3rd July, Honda's troops attacked British positions in the Sitang Bend. On 10th July, after a battle for a country which was almost entirely under chest-high water, both the Japanese and 89th Indian Brigade withdrew. Honda, pressed by Kimura and Kimura's Chief of Staff Tanaka, had attacked too early. Sakurai's 28th Army was not ready to start the breakout until 17th July. The breakout was a disaster. The British had captured the Japanese plans from an officer killed making a final reconnaissance, and had placed ambushes or artillery concentrations on the routes they were to use. Hundreds of men drowned trying to cross the swollen Sitang on improvised bamboo floats and rafts. Burmese guerrillas and bandits killed stragglers east of the river. The breakout cost the Japanese nearly 10,000 men, half the strength of 28th Army. Some units of 105 Independent Brigade were almost entirely wiped out. British and Indian casualties were minimal. Aftermath. Slim had been promoted to command Allied Land Forces Southeast Asia, the Army component of Southeast Asia Command. He was replaced at 14th Army by Lieutenant General Miles Dempsey, who you may know from the European Command in World War II in Europe. 14th Army and 15th Corps headquarters had returned to India to plan the next stage of the campaign to retake Southeast Asia. A new corps, 34th Corps, under Lieutenant General Ulrich Lindbergh Roberts, was raised and assigned to 14th Army. The next intended operation was to be an amphibious assault on the western coast of Malaya, codenamed Operation Zipper. The surrender of Japan forestalled Zipper, but the operation was undertaken post-war as the quickest way of getting occupation troops into India. This ends the Burma Campaign series of lectures.